I still remember the color, not just red, but the deep, ugly crimson of a man caught mid-betrayal, flooding his face the second the cabin door swung open. We stood there, Daniel and I, framed in the doorway of my mountain refuge in the Skelridge Peaks. Champagne chilled in my hand, his in a white-knuckled grip. We took in the scene like witnesses at a public execution. Matthew, my husband, lunged for the knitted throw I'd made for our 5th anniversary, yanking it over himself with the desperation of a man trying to hide more than just his skin. Behind him, half swallowed by shadows, was Sandra, his colleague, my so-called friend, Daniel's wife. Her eyes were wide, caught between panic and defiance, black streaks of mascara cutting down her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. "Surprise," I murmured, my lips curving into something that could pass for a smile in bad lighting. It wasn't a smile, it was the quiet, poisonous shape my mouth made when rage locked my throat shut. My voice held steady, though the air inside me was already kindling. "I've learned something since. When the ground gives way beneath you, calm is just the mask you wear while you decide whether to fall, or pull someone else down with you." But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 months earlier, I was still living in the warm lie we called a marriage. 12 years together, college sweethearts turned picture-perfect spouses, the sort of couple people pointed to as proof that love could last. While Matthew climbed the glinting glass steps of his corporate investment firm, I ran my interior design studio from home. We had our city apartment and, more importantly, the cabin, my dream in timber and stone, bought 6 years ago in the Skelridge Peaks and restored piece by piece until it became our sanctuary. It was there I thought our story would always end, in peace, not in ashes. Daniel and Sandra came into our lives at a charity gala, all easy charm and polished smiles. They shared our love of hiking, wine by the fire, and weekend escapes. Before long, dinners turned into overnights into shared holidays. Sandra and I would linger over cappuccinos, trading ideas for design projects, while Matthew and Daniel compared fishing spots and market trends. It felt rare. Real. The kind of friendship you guard. I remember one brunch in particular, Sandra laughing too freely at something Matthew said, tilting her head just so, like a flower chasing light. I thought I was lucky. I thought I'd found people who belonged in our inner circle. I thought a lot of things. The first fracture came quietly. A text message, his phone on the counter while he showered. I glanced over without thinking. The preview read, "Can't wait for our next escape. Still feeling you." The sender, V, work project. My fingers froze. My chest didn't just tighten, it locked. I told myself it was some flirty colleague stepping over a line. I told myself I trusted my husband. I told myself I didn't want to be that wife. Then came the late nights. The weekend emergencies. The solitary trips to the cabin to clear his head and work on something called the Jefferson Proposal. Always the Jefferson Proposal. The lies piled up like snowdrifts, receipts for champagne when he only drank scotch, 2 top dinners on nights he swore he ate at his desk. I wasn't stupid. But there's the suspicion that gnaws quietly, and then there's the truth, the kind that bites through flesh. The bite came the Wednesday I dropped by his office unannounced with coffee. The receptionist blinked at me. "Matthew? Oh, he's not here. Took a personal day." A personal day. While I thought he was buried in budgeting meetings, he was somewhere else entirely. That night, I tracked his phone, a low point, but necessary. The location, our cabin. My sacred place. The place I'd built nail by nail, fabric by fabric, with the patience of someone crafting a forever home. I checked our shared cloud storage. And there it was, proof with a pulse. A woman's jacket hanging beside his. A lipstick-smeared glass, scarlet, not my shade. And in one careless selfie by the lake, behind him, blurred but unmistakable, Sandra. The warmth drained from my fingers. Not a stranger. Not a nameless fling. Her. My friend. Daniel's wife. And in that moment, something sharp and cold took root inside me, not grief, not shock, but the first seed of retribution. I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, drowning in the debris of my marriage, photos, receipts, screenshots, each piece another nail in the coffin. Hours slipped past in silence, broken only by my shallow breathing. My mind spun between violent urges: hurl his belongings onto Sycamore Street, torch the Skelridge cabin, erase every trace of him. In films, the wronged wife always knows her next move. In life, betrayal leaves you paralyzed, staring into the wreckage of what you thought was unshakable. Then it came, not rage, not grief, but a sharp, surgical calm. A clarity so cold it burned. I stood, wiped the tears from my face, and began to plot. If they wanted games, I'd set the rules. And my endgame would be retribution. Step 1, Daniel. How does one tell a man his wife has been using my bed, my sanctuary, to betray us both? Hallmark doesn't make that card. We met at a cafe on the far side of Norwin, far from familiar eyes. When he walked in, I almost didn't know him. The man who'd once been the roaring center of every dinner party now seemed shrunken, his shoulders folding inward like he was trying to disappear. "I think we need to talk about Matthew and Sandra," I said after the meaningless small talk. His gaze locked with mine. Not shock. Not confusion. Just weary acknowledgement. "You already know," I said, my voice low. A single nod. His finger traced the rim of his untouched coffee mug. "About 3 months now." 3 months. While I was still playing the blissfully ignorant wife, he'd been choking down this truth across countless game nights, brunches, and hikes. My stomach turned. "Why stay silent?" I asked. "Why did you?" His reply was soft, but it hit like a slap. "Fair. Yesterday," I admitted. "I found out yesterday." He exhaled, a sound like surrender. "Sandra left her iPad unlocked. I saw the messages. They've been meeting at your cabin." "Our cabin," I corrected automatically, the word tasting like blood. "My retreat. My creation. Desecrated." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "She thinks he'll leave you. That they'll start over together." I laughed, the kind of brittle, ugly laugh that doesn't sound human. "Is that her fairy tale? And you? Just collateral damage?" His mouth twisted. "Apparently I'm too cold. Too married to my work. Not enough fire. Matthew makes her feel alive." Each word was a twist of the knife. I saw them in my mind, in my bed, her lipstick on his mouth, their laughter muffled by my pillows. "Last month," I said, my voice like glass, "he told me he wanted to renovate the master bath at the cabin. I designed it. Weeks of work. Every sample, every tile, every plan rejected. Now I know why, she was choosing with him." Daniel's hand closed over mine, his palm warm, mine ice cold. Something passed between us, not comfort, not quite, but the first shared spark of vengeance. "What's your move?" he asked. I wanted to tell him I wanted the clock turned back. My marriage restored. Sandra erased. The cabin cleansed of their shadows. But there's no undo button for treachery. So I told him the plan instead. The next weeks became theater. I perfected the role of oblivious wife, smiling at dinners, leaning in when Matthew spun tales of impossible workloads, nodding when he lamented his endless business trips. Each lie layered over the next, while a cold fury coiled tighter inside me. The worst moment? Sandra's text. "It's been too long since we had girl time." Girl time. The audacity. I met her at her favorite restaurant, the place she swore had the best truffle risotto in Norwin. She arrived late, swanning in with that performative air of someone who expects the world to forgive their delays. Over appetizers, she chattered about a silk dress she'd splurged on, about how Daniel never noticed her anymore, about her need to take a solo trip to rediscover herself. Her phone kept buzzing. I didn't need to check to know whose messages they were. "You should," I said, my tone light but deliberate. "Someplace remote. No distractions. Just you, and whatever it is you're really looking for." "That's exactly it," she said, her eyes bright with self-satisfaction. "Peace and nature." "Like a cabin in the mountains," I added casually. For half a heartbeat, I saw it, the tremor behind her pupils. Guilt, fear, a shadow flitting across her face. Then she masked it with a quick smile. "Maybe. Haven't decided yet." I excused myself, walked to the bathroom, and emptied the contents of my stomach into the porcelain bowl. When I came back, my makeup was flawless again, my lips curved in a smile that hid the acid burning my throat. I finished lunch with the woman sleeping with my husband, nodding and laughing as if I didn't already know every sordid detail. Meanwhile, Daniel and I had become our own quiet conspiracy. We met in out-of-the-way diners and anonymous coffee shops, trading details, mapping patterns, aligning timelines. By the end of September, we had their schedule down to muscle memory, the first weekend of every month. Matthew's strategic planning retreats for work. Sandra's sick aunt in Bristol. Their next escape was already in motion, the first weekend of October, peak season for the Skelridge Peaks, crimson maples, gold aspens, the whole mountainside on fire with color. Matthew dropped hints over dinner, talking about winterizing the place before the cold snap. I could come with you, I offered, letting my voice carry the right mix of warmth and naivety. It's been ages since we went together. He didn't even hesitate. You've got that client pitch to prep. Besides, it'll be boring, pipes, gutters. Nothing worth the trip. I gave him a slow nod, letting him think I'd conceded. You're right. Go ahead. I'll keep busy here. That night, I lay next to the man I'd spent 12 years building a life with, staring into the darkness. I thought of our early years, sleepless nights dreaming aloud, his steady hand at my father's funeral, the way we danced in the bare living room of our first apartment before the movers arrived. And then I wondered, had it all been true for him? Or had the rot been there from the beginning, hidden behind those warm eyes and easy smiles? The affair was a wound, yes, but the infection was older, deeper. The most unbearable part wasn't the image of their bodies in my bed. It was knowing that while I had offered him my entire self, my trust, my youth, my ambitions, he had been carving out space for a betrayal of his own design. There was a moment when I wanted to wake him, drag the truth from him, demand to know why our cabin, why I had never been enough. But I already knew the outcome. He'd lie, twist, make me question my own sanity. No. Better to let him sleep. Better to let him believe I was still his blind, adoring wife. His overconfidence would be my opening. That night, I made myself a promise. I had given him everything, and he had discarded it like it was disposable. I would not break. I would not stand as the tragic figure in his story. This was still my life, and I would reclaim it, piece by jagged piece, starting with the cabin in the mountains. The first frost came the day before their trip. I stood at the kitchen window, watching delicate ice patterns creep across the glass, thinking how my own heart had formed the same protective shell. Daniel and I met one last time before the weekend, breakfast in a nondescript diner 2 towns over. By now, we were fluent in secrecy, coded phrases, harmless smiles for public view, all while laying the final stones of our plan. You're certain? He asked, I searching mine as I absently stirred my coffee, letting the spoon scrape the porcelain. We could just call them out. Divorce. Walk away. I met his gaze, my voice low and sure. And let them think they've won? No, Daniel. That's not the ending they've earned. I set the spoon down, the clink against porcelain sharper than I intended. So that's your solution? I asked quietly. Let them walk off into their happily ever after while we're left sweeping up the shards? Daniel rubbed a hand through his hair, eyes clouded. No. But I'm worried. About you. About what happens once this is done. A fair question, and one I'd already dissected in the sleepless hours. No plan could repair what they'd broken. No confrontation could give us back the marriages we'd believed in. But this wasn't about repair. It was about reclaiming control, about seizing the pen and writing the ending myself instead of being erased from the page. I need this, Daniel, I said, my voice low, deliberate. I need to see his face when the truth detonates. I want to be the one who walks away, not the discarded afterthought. His hand closed over mine, solid and warm. Then we make it flawless. Our plan was almost insultingly simple. We knew their pattern. Matthew would leave work around 3 on Friday, bragging about beating traffic. Sandra, meanwhile, would inform Daniel of her weekend with the ever-ailing aunt in Bristol. The cabin's security cameras, my safety measure for the remote location, had been watching them for months. Matthew seemed to have conveniently forgotten they existed. I'd watched them arrive together in my driveway, unload groceries into my kitchen, sip wine from my glasses. No sound, just silent treachery in perfect, high-definition frames. Timing was everything. We wanted them comfortable but not yet tangled in sheets. I refused to give them the satisfaction of my humiliation, and I wouldn't force Daniel to endure that either. 7 o'clock would be perfect, enough for them to unpack, open wine, maybe start dinner. The domestic tranquility they'd stolen from us, shattered in a single knock on the door. But I had other moves to make. One card Daniel didn't even know I held. While Matthew thought I was networking at a design conference in Boston, I drove to the Skelridge cabin 2 days before their little getaway. My name alone sat on the deed, a detail he'd dismissed as tax strategy, but which now felt like a loaded weapon. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. The space I'd built, the sanctuary I'd dreamed into being, had been contaminated. I ran my fingertips over the furniture, the walls, claiming each surface anew while tasting the bitterness in the back of my throat. In the master bedroom closet, behind folded spare blankets, I found it, a small bag. Her bag. Sandra's toiletries, her robe, her slippers, soft, smug evidence that she'd carved out a place for herself here. That she believed she belonged. I didn't remove them. Instead, I left a gift of my own, a discreet recorder under the bed. Not to capture the obvious, I had no appetite for that kind of proof, but to catch their quieter sins. The words they thought were safe. The plans they dared to speak aloud. In the study, I downloaded 6 months of surveillance footage onto a flash drive. Betrayal, catalogued and archived. Then I photographed the cabin's paperwork, the deed, the insurance, the utility bills, lingering on the page where my name stood alone in bold print. Finally, I installed one last camera above the front door, the lens angled perfectly to record the moment they realized the stage they'd been performing on wasn't theirs. When I drove back toward Norwin, the frost was already beginning to silver the roadside grass. And for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. I hadn't salvaged my marriage, but I'd taken back something far more satisfying. Power. The day of reckoning began in the gray stillness before noon. Daniel and I met at a modest roadside hotel just outside Norwin, neutral ground for the aftermath. We'd each take our own room later. Neither of us wanted to return to the hollow echo of our empty houses that night. I brought something, he said, sliding a bottle of vintage champagne from his bag, the glass catching the thin autumn light. For after? I asked. For whatever comes after, he replied with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. We can call it the wake for 2 marriages, or the christening of our freedom. I preferred his version. We took my car up into the Skelridge peaks, leaving his behind. The mountains were at their zenith of autumn, crimson maples and embergold aspens blazing as if the land itself had been set alight. On another day, I would have admired it. Today, it felt like the world was reflecting back the slow, deliberate burn in my chest. Daniel barely spoke, his gaze fixed on the road unfurling ahead. Every so often, he checked his phone, tracking Sandra's location. Technology had made infidelity more convenient, but it also left a digital trail for anyone willing to follow it. She's there, he said finally. Arrived about an hour ago. I kept my eyes on the switchback curves. Matthew 2, cameras show 2 people entered at 5:13. He glanced at me as we turned onto the private drive. Are you ready for this? To look them both in the eye? To walk away on your own terms? I've been ready, I said, and for the first time I knew it was true. The hurt hadn't evaporated, it would linger, a scar under the skin, but alongside it lived something harder, cleaner, resolve. They had taken my past, they would not script my future. We left the car just beyond the tree line, out of sight. Through the branches, I could see the warm, amber glow spilling from the cabin windows. Smoke curled lazily from my chimney. My firewood, Daniel muttered. They've made themselves at home. Not for long. I tightened my grip on the champagne bottle. Curtains up. The walk up the path felt almost ceremonial. My heartbeat slowed, my breath evened, a strange calm settling in. This was no ending, it was the prologue to something sharper. Matthew opened the door, and in that instant I wished I could bottle his expression, the split-second slide from shock to confusion to raw, dawning horror. His mouth opened and closed like he was rehearsing excuses but couldn't decide which script to use. "Ashley," he managed. "What are you?" "Surprise inspection," I said with a brightness just shy of venom, holding up the bottle. "We thought we'd drop in. Hope we're not ruining anything." Sandra appeared in the hallway, swaddled in my hand-knit throw from that Vermont winter. The color drained from her face so quickly I almost heard it. "Daniel," she whispered, clutching the blanket like it might shield her from what was coming. "Hello, darling," Daniel replied, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "How's Connecticut? And your aunt?" Matthew stepped back without realizing it, creating space between us as if proximity might make my fury contagious. I walked past him, scanning the room, salmon baking, my recipe, 2 wine glasses on the coffee table beside a half-finished bottle, the hearth blazing with our fire. The scene was almost domestic enough to be photographed for a magazine, except for the stench of betrayal that clung to it. "Don't stop on our account," I said, heading to the kitchen for 2 more glasses. "We brought champagne. A toast seems appropriate." "Ashley, I can explain," Matthew began, voice dipping into that familiar register he used when he thought charm could patch bullet holes. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, popping the cork with a clean, resonant crack. "You've always had a talent for weaving stories. For dressing lies in silk." I poured 4 glasses, the bubbles rising in steady streams. I handed one to Daniel, one to Matthew, but none to Sandra. She could keep holding my blanket if she needed something to grip when the ground went out from under her. "What is this?" Matthew barked, his voice rising now that the shock was ebbing. Anger fit him better, he'd always worn it like armor. "Some kind of ambush?" Daniel swirled the champagne in his glass, studying the bubbles as if they were more interesting than my husband. "An ambush," he mused. "Not a bad choice of words, considering the battlefield you've made of this place." Sandra finally stirred, taking a few halting steps toward her husband. "Daniel, please, it's not." He cut her off without looking at her. "What it looks like? Try harder. I expected more imagination from you." I sank into my favorite armchair, crossing my legs with deliberate ease, the picture of a hostess indulging unruly guests. "Since we're all assembled," I said lightly, "I thought we might discuss property. Specifically, this cabin." Matthew's brow tightened. "What about it?" "Well," I said, "as the legal owner, I've grown curious about certain activities here lately." "Legal owner?" Sandra repeated, her gaze snapping to him. Oh, that flicker in Matthew's eyes, that flash of panic. Worth the months of quiet rage it took to get here. "Oh yes," I confirmed, sliding my phone toward her with a photo of the deed. "Sole owner, in fact. When we bought it, we put it in my name for tax reasons. At the time it seemed clever. Now it feels providential." "That's just a technicality," Matthew said quickly. "We bought it together." "With my inheritance," I cut in, my voice suddenly sharpened. "Money from my father's death. Remember that time, Matthew? When you held me while I could barely breathe? Tell me, was that comfort real, or just tactical groundwork for this?" He dropped his gaze. I turned to Sandra, who'd sunk onto the sofa, still gripping my blanket like a lifeline. "Did he tell you? That every board in these walls was paid for with grief? That when he brought you here, he brought you into the space I built to stitch myself back together?" She shook her head, and the tears started. "Ashley," Matthew began, shifting into the polished, conciliatory tone he used when finessing angry clients. "Why don't Daniel and Sandra give us a moment?" "No," Daniel said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "We stay." I smiled at him, not gratitude, exactly, but recognition. Then I turned back to Matthew. "Besides, we're just getting to the fun part. The security footage." I picked up the remote and powered on the TV above the fireplace. A few clicks, and the front door appeared in crisp, high definition. "I had these installed last year. For safety, that's what I told you. Who knew they'd end up as such versatile investments?" The footage rolled, month after month of them arriving together, slipping into my home, arms full of groceries. Once, a small gift bag. I knew from the audio, captured on another device, that it was her birthday present. And here's the back deck, I continued, switching feeds. The two of them under the stars, his arm looped around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him like it was her cabin. "You've been spying on me," Matthew snapped. His voice was tight, brittle now. "No," I said evenly. "I've been reviewing footage from my property. There's a legal difference. But you'll like this part even better." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, turning it between my fingers. "These," I said, "are from the bedroom cameras." Sandra made a sound, part gasp, part choke. "You didn't." I smiled without confirming. "Would you like to see? I've even edited a highlight reel. Highly educational." Matthew's flush deepened. "This is invasion of privacy." "My property," I reminded him again, my tone almost pleasant. "And the footage?" "Not even the main course." From my bag, I withdrew my laptop and opened it to an email draft. "This," I said, tapping the screen, "is a message to your partners, Matthew." Attached, select images from the cabin cameras, paired with expense reports showing client dinners on nights you were here. Fraud. Theft. All wrapped up in a pretty bow. That tends to be frowned upon in investment banking, doesn't it? His complexion drained from furious crimson to a flat, sickly gray. "You wouldn't." "I haven't decided," I said evenly. "That depends entirely on how the rest of this conversation unfolds." Then I turned to Sandra. "And you? I have something tailored just for you, a message to the board of the children's charity you chair. The one parading itself as a pillar of family values and moral leadership. I wonder how they'll respond when they see these images, or when they read about you using donor-funded trips to rendezvous with your married lover." Her composure shattered. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in thick, black rivulets. "Please, Ashley, my career, my reputation." "Your reputation?" I laughed once, sharp, humorless. "You're wrapped in my blanket, in my home, after spending the night with my husband, and that's your priority? Fascinating sense of order you've got there." Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself at my side, the visual of a united front. "We're not here to obliterate you," he said, voice steady but cold. "Though we could. Easily." "What do you want?" Matthew asked, his voice weighted now, the first crack of resignation in it. "Finally." "A clean, fast divorce," I said. "Terms, I keep the cabin, obviously, the city apartment, and half of everything else. You sign off on an adultery clause, no cowardly irreconcilable differences. And you both," my eyes moved from him to Sandra, "stay out of our lives. Permanently." "My terms are simple," Daniel added. "Full custody of our daughter. The house. Half of everything else. And Sandra publicly owns what she's done." "You just want to humiliate us," Sandra spat, voice trembling. "No," I corrected, calm as steel. "We want accountability." "The humiliation part? That's entirely in your head." Matthew began pacing, his body a restless calculation machine. It was his gift, seeing a dozen possible moves ahead, weighing angles, searching for loopholes. But here, there was no exit door he could squeeze through. "And if we refuse?" he asked finally. I smiled. This time it was real, and he looked more rattled than if I'd screamed. "Then tonight the emails go out. Tomorrow, the lawyers get called. We file the loudest, ugliest, most public divorce proceedings imaginable. Your affair becomes public record. Every false expense gets flagged. Every weekend here is documented and timestamped for anyone who cares to read." I leaned forward, voice low. "Is that how you want your grand new life to begin, with auditors and subpoenas breathing down your neck?" The silence was thick enough to choke on. Matthew and Sandra exchanged a look, that silent, private language they shared. Once, that intimacy would have gutted me. Now it only made me think, let it bind you in ruin. "I need to think," Matthew muttered. "You have until 9 a.m., I replied. "Daniel and I will be at the Highland Inn. Deliver your answer by then." "You're throwing us out?" Sandra's voice pitched higher. It's almost dark. Yes, Daniel said flatly. Pack it all. Especially the little stash in the closet. His gaze cut to the bag I'd discovered days before. Matthew started to speak, then thought better of it. The fight had bled out of him. One more thing, I said, crossing to the liquor cabinet. I retrieved the small package I'd hidden on my earlier visit and handed it to Matthew. Happy anniversary. His face folded in on itself when he saw it. 13 years next week. Lace was the traditional gift. Inside, a handkerchief, delicate lace, embroidered with our initials, ordered months ago in a life that no longer existed. I suppose you won't be needing this, I said quietly. They packed in silence, shadows moving around the cabin like ghosts. When they were gone, Daniel and I stood on the deck. The last light bled out of the sky, and the mountains burned with their own fire, scarlet, gold, and the deep, smoldering orange of something almost finished turning to ash. Are you okay? Daniel's voice was low, his shoulder a steady warmth against mine in the bite of the mountain air. No, I said, my breath misting in the cold. But I will be. Behind us, the cabin door shut with a final, satisfying click. An engine turned over, tires crunched along the gravel, and the sound faded until the only thing left was the wind moving through the trees. They were gone, for now, for good. We stood together in the deepening dusk, champagne glasses in hand, the scent of wood smoke curling around us. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To taking back what's ours, I replied, touching mine to his. The chime rang out, clean and certain, into the mountain silence. A year later, I stood on that same deck, the same mountains ablaze with autumn fire, the same impossible blue sky overhead. Only everything had changed. The divorce had been final for 6 months. Matthew hadn't fought the terms, the evidence was too sharp, too heavy, too potentially ruinous to his career. He'd signed every page without a fight, his resignation a quieter, more satisfying victory than any outburst could have been. Daniel's split with Sandra had been uglier. She'd clawed at the custody agreement, but months of documented absences during her affair buried her claims. In the end, she fled to Chicago, leaving behind a collapsed reputation and a daughter who had learned too soon what betrayal looked like. As for Matthew and Sandra, poetic justice arrived quickly. Their alliance, stitched together from deceit, couldn't hold under the strain of public exposure and private blame. They didn't last 3 months. She faulted him for her custody loss, he faulted her for costing him his promotion after the firm quietly cut him down a rung. The grand love story collapsed into dust, its foundation too rotten to stand. I, meanwhile, had rebuilt. The year had been a slow pilgrimage through grief, anger, and acceptance toward something better. I poured myself into my design business, rebranding, expanding, saying yes to projects I once thought beyond my reach. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, found joy in small rituals again, and, most importantly, reclaimed the cabin. At first, every corner was a raw nerve. But I painted over their shadows. Replaced the furniture. And one night under a swollen, full moon, I fed that damn throw blanket to a bonfire, watching it curl, blacken, and vanish into embers. My sanctuary was mine again. Footsteps broke my thoughts. Daniel appeared, 2 mugs in hand. He passed me one, the steam curling between us. Emily's finally asleep, he said, leaning on the railing. The mountain air knocked her out. I smiled, picturing her in the second bedroom, cocooned in blankets, her stuffed animals crowded protectively around her. She loves it here. So do I. His eyes met mine with the quiet recognition of 2 people who'd walked through fire and come out the other side. We hadn't planned this, whatever this was. At first, it was strategy, aligning stories for lawyers, comparing notes for court. But coffee meetings had bled into dinners, dinners into hikes, hikes into laughter. And then, 6 months ago, a kiss that startled us both with its ease, its rightness. We still lived apart. We were cautious, raw scars don't vanish overnight, but we were building something honest, something not born in secrecy and lies. What are you thinking? He asked, watching me over the rim of his mug. Everything, I said. And nothing. How different this is from last year, he murmured. I nodded. Do you regret any of it, how we handled things? I let the question hang, tasting the coffee, the crisp air, the knowledge of what we'd survived. Did I regret the confrontation? The ultimatums? The public scorch of our divorces? Not for a heartbeat. No, I said at last, the word steady as stone. I needed to take back control, to end it on my terms, not theirs. I turned to him fully. They were writing us out of our own stories, Daniel, reducing us to footnotes, to the discarded spouses that made their version of happiness possible. I couldn't accept that ending. So you rewrote it, he said, a small, knowing smile tugging at his mouth. We rewrote it, I corrected. Both of us. He set his mug down on the railing and took my hand, his thumb drawing slow circles against my palm, a quiet tether in the chill air. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't caught them? If they'd just kept going? Sometimes, I admitted. I might still be playing the part, booking anniversary trips, sketching bathroom renovations, making excuses for why Matthew felt so far away. Would that have been better? I shook my head. No. Living a lie isn't living. I'd rather bleed from the truth than sleep peacefully under a lie. Inside, the cabin's fire burned low, casting a soft glow through the windows, the same hearth that had once warmed deceit now becoming the heart of something entirely different. You know, Daniel said, his voice thoughtful, I keep seeing her face in my head, Sandra, when we walked in. That split second where she realized the game was over. I laughed, the sound surprising even me, echoing into the vast dark. Matthew looked the same. Like he'd just seen two ghosts walk in from the cold. They never imagined we'd figure it out, let alone join forces, Daniel said. Their biggest mistake, I agreed, resting my head lightly against his shoulder. Among many. We stood in silence, watching the first sharp points of starlight break through the twilight. Inside, Emily slept undisturbed, her dreams untainted by the shadows we'd walked through to get here. To her, I was just her dad's friend who made pancake animals and knew the names of flowers on the trail. I bought the cabin outright, I said suddenly. The papers came through yesterday. It's officially mine now. Daniel's brows lifted. Good. This place deserves to belong to someone who truly values it. It means something different now, I told him. It's not just a retreat anymore, it's proof. Proof that you can face the worst moment of your life and still walk away with something worth keeping. He slid his arm around my waist. Are we something worth keeping? I smiled. I think we're getting there. One weekend at a time. The night pressed in, cold and sharp, but my chest felt warm. Betrayal had once poisoned this place, now every board, every stone, every breath of pine-scented air belonged to me again. What Matthew and Sandra had stolen in secret, Daniel and I were building in daylight, foundations of honesty and hard-earned trust, one layer at a time. Let's go inside, I said, gathering our empty mugs. It's cold. We stepped back over the threshold, my threshold, closing the door on the dark outside. Some might call it poetic justice. I think of it as reclamation. The story they tried to steal was mine again, the cabin, my dignity, my voice. And if the ending wasn't what I'd once imagined, it was still mine to write. In fact, it was no ending at all, but the first line of something better.